Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Young Lawyer Podcast. For all of those newbies listening in, this podcast aims to bring the legal community together by highlighting the available support for young lawyers, discussing different journeys people take, and other important factors that could affect your legal journey. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the Young Lawyer Podcast.
Alrighty, well, we're back with the next episode of the Young Lawyer Podcast. If you could just introduce yourself for the listeners at home and how you began your legal journey.
Hi, everybody. My name's Jahan Kalantar. I am a solicitor practicing outside of New South Wales. I run a law firm called Executive Legal here in Sydney. My law journey started in 2013 when I was admitted. I did the unusual step of going straight to the private bar, and I was at the bar for 4 years before deciding to come and start a practice primarily in the areas that I was doing at the bar. So criminal law, commercial law, and family law. And it's been a really exciting ride so far.
And were you like most people straight out of high school into it, or did you fall into it a bit later in life? Or
Yeah, so that's a great question. I basically came to law later in life. So my undergraduate degree outside of high school, I went to university and I studied commerce and mathematics, and I did an undergraduate degree in commerce. And then I kind of went into the working world, and I was working as a banker and in a variety of financial services roles for about 3 or 4 years before I decided to go back to university and reskill. So I qualified for my JD in 2000 and it finished in 2013, but I went into it in 2010. So I was a more mature age student. So I went into law, I guess, at 25-ish.
okay, and what was it about the law that attracted you to it?
Well, at first it was the idea that it was a more stable career than banking, which is insane when you see how it's gone since then, and how the rips and tides of what happens to our profession. But it was during the banking crisis that I thought, you know what, I don't really resonate with this type of work, and I'd like to go into something a bit more stable. So that's what initially drew it to me. But I've really enjoyed law, and while I didn't enjoy all of law school, I enjoyed huge chunks of it, and I really was obsessed with advocacy. I fell in love with anything to do with advocacy, with litigation, with disputes. It had me from day one, and it's that art form that I've really enjoyed developing and seeing more of.
Yeah, it's not too often you come across many people that actually like the advocacy side of it. You know, for me especially, I'm pretty nervous still in court, being a young lawyer. So how do you develop that and get better at that skill?
The first thing you have to understand is the first, call it 5,000 times you show up to court, you're going to be overwhelmed. You're going to be scared. You're going to be nervous. I still get scared and nervous, particularly when there's a lot at stake. You do come to grips with it, and the skills that you develop in that crucible make you a better lawyer all round, which is really cool. As a young lawyer, God, I've made every conceivable mistake you can make. I've gone in there, and there have been days where I've walked out of a courtroom and gone, well, that's it for me. I'm never doing that to myself again. This is just the worst series of choices that led me to this. But it's got a very steep learning curve. But once you're sort of on the other side of it, you can start to really accrue the skills and start to see results.
And I guess just going back to obviously making that transition from student to a lawyer, how did you, I guess, go about that? How did you find that difficult or relatively easy?
I have the utmost sympathy for students, because it was hard to get a law clerkship when I was a law student. It is harder now. Whenever I put out a call for paralegals at Executive Legal, there are candidates, dozens of them, that are far better than I ever was. Like, I think that maybe, you know what, I should work for them. Just the caliber of individual that is coming to work and give their time to grow their skills it's staggering. And it was challenging, and it will always be challenging. I think that law has fundamentally an oversupply of people, but I think there's really an undersupply of exceptional lawyers. And that's why I think that people shouldn't be worried about going into law, because yes, it's hard to get in there. Yes, you're going to struggle. But the really high quality lawyers who are very good at their work, they will always be in demand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess what are some sort of setbacks you faced along your initial journey in that period?
So, I mean, I think for my first job, God, I had to walk around and just the amount of networking, and I hate that word, that I had to do was staggering. This is before we had systems that made it so, much easier, like Seek and whatnot. Like it was around the time back when you still had to send your CV out one by one to law firms. You would go to networking events, you would harass the poor associate who's there, hey, do you guys have jobs going, et cetera, et cetera. And it really does become disheartening after, you've been knocked back 40, 50, 60 times. You just think, well, what's the point of all this? How are we ever going to be able to reach a stage where, I'm going to get my foot through the door? But it does get easier and it does get better. And, you will slowly but surely find that resistance to you and the law goes down the more you stick to it.
Okay. And yeah, I think I'm in the same boat. I can't say I'm a fan of the networking events and just trying to sell yourself when really, everyone just kind of wants to catch up and have a chat.
Well, that's right, and I think it's very hard because when you're a young lawyer, it's a legitimate question. What do I have to offer? Compared to say the problem with law school, and fundamentally, it's a problem that most disciplines face, is that it's treated like an academic type discipline when law is not. Law's carpentry, law's plumbing, law's being a sparky. It's useless to know what goes. The legal framework of an affidavit is less useful to me than knowing how to draft one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what law school generally doesn't do a very good job of conveying is the transfer of that experience and knowledge into practical skills that you can utilize to do your role. So, you know about things like, okay, well, this is the indefeasibility of a mortgage, but no one teaches you, okay, when you register a mortgage, you have to go get this stamp. You got to go to this building, or you got to send an email to this, and it does this. You learn about the idea of these are the 5 ways you can set aside a subpoena, but nobody says, hey, when you draft a subpoena, on the front, here is where you put the person's name. Here is where you file the document. Here's how you write a check. I mean, something as basic as writing a check, which still lawyers have to do. Young lawyers are never taught that. And it's very disconcerting and very stressful for them because they come into the real world and, the partner asks a question that for us is now basic, like, hey, draft a subpoena or write a check. And the young lawyer is just taken aback because at no stage in the 4 years did anyone think maybe I should teach this person how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's been said time and time again, the experience you get from practical and from uni is just two separate things.
The value of university, and there's lots of value to university, but the great thing about law school is this. When you're sitting in your meeting with a partner and someone is telling you a story, because nowhere in life have I ever had a situation as clear cut as a uni problem question where, in paragraph 1, I get ethical issue 1. In paragraph 2, I get ethical issue 2. It's usually a convoluted story with garbage, nonsense, noise. But what uni does, if you do it seriously and take it seriously, is as you're listening, you go, oh, that sounds to me like a administrative law problem, or, oh, that kind of reminds me of a real property problem. And it's developing that idea that when someone's telling you something, that there is this huge backlog of knowledge in your head that sort of tells you the area where to look. That's really the technical side of law from a university perspective. So you hear, okay, it's a real property question. You go and you go, okay, well, I did real property. I know how that works. You go get your real property book and you start to go through it and you find things that remind you of the problem and you look for a solution for them. The downside of it is, unfortunately, people come out with no practical skills at all. And that's really concerning. You wouldn't allow a doctor who's never, ever operated on a patient, never stood in an operation, to be allowed out into the general public. It's just not heard of. Whereas in lawyers, we allow it all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, even with nurses, they've got to do a significant amount of practical experience before they can even get their degree.
And there's an acknowledgement of that in the practical legal training component of everyone's degree and the requirements to do that sort of stuff. But the reality is that very rarely will you have a set out practical legal training that gives you the skills that you need. It made sense for a different type of era where people would come out, you might be you and the sole practitioner. The sole practitioner's got time. They sit with you, they explain things. But at the rapid fire pace of today's world, it really does bear a need to be updated, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because more often than not, especially with the generalist ones, you just kind of get thrown in the deep end and just told to sink or swim, basically.
Absolutely. And I remember the first time I was told, hey, draft a Calder Bank letter. I don't know what that was. I didn't know what is that a font? Like, what's Calder Bank? Like, what are you talking about? And I was like, hey, I don't know what that is. And they were like, you don't stand a chance, kid. And they just left. And you're Googling Calder Bank letter, you're writing all this sort of stuff. You get this terrible template. And you slowly over time realize, okay, there is an ability. I passed law school. I'm not an idiot. I can figure it out. But I think it takes a young lawyer a few years to get that confidence that if somebody says here, hey, can you tell me the appropriate doctrine that will allow us to beat this case, for you to go, okay, I don't know what any of that means, but I will figure it out in a short amount of time.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think that goes back to what you said earlier about the steep learning curve, because those first few years are never easy, as a lot of people have said on this podcast.
It's so, people compare it to like medicine, and the difference is medicine to some extent is at least more intuitive than the law, right? So let's take a principle like the Countess of Bective, which is a case from 1800 something, which stands for the proposition that if you are taking care of a ward, you are entitled to use some of that ward's money to benefit someone else, as long as it also benefits the ward. Now, how on earth would you know that principle automatically? Like, that's just that even I've explained it. I've probably explained it wrong. And I've probably, you may not even understand what I said, but you would never intuitively know that. Whereas like, okay, fine. Pressure moves from a higher area to a low area. That makes sense. Okay. The heart's basically a pump. It's got valves that do these things. It's far more intuitive than law is, because law, there is this huge knowledge base that if you don't have access to and context about, you're never going to understand. And that's the difficulty. The best lawyers are the ones that are neurotic. They're the ones that are worried. They go, okay, what have I not thought about? Is there something like the Countess of Bective lurking in the back that I haven't thought about? And over time, you start to, I guess, trust your instincts a bit more, and you get a little bit more comfortable. But the learning curve is enormous, because there's hundreds of years of jurisprudence, much of which disagrees with one another, and much of which you can't possibly intuit without knowing some principle that you never learned, or if you did learn, it was 1 minute in a 2-hour lecture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess while we're on that topic of young lawyers' skills, what is something someone could do to stand out for you? Is it reaching out on LinkedIn? Is it approaching you? Because especially with the market nowadays, it's, as you said, the supply for young lawyers is quite high, whereas the demand is quite low.
I think it's about really coming at it from a different perspective, right? I can tell you that every single day, without fail, 3 to 4 young lawyers approach me for mentorship, for advice, for work, for something. And I do my best to guide those that I can. I do my best. I always support them to the best of my abilities to do that. But I'm a nobody at a boutique law firm. If I'm being approached 4 to 5 times a day, if you're a somebody somewhere, it's going to be multiples of that. So firstly, approaching someone coldly is not going to get you anywhere. It's people who take, I guess, a sort of different approach to things that are generally the ones that stick out. So, I've recently had someone who was approach me via LinkedIn, but what they did very cleverly is they wrote a very excellent, excellent response to me that drew upon something I had recently posted that clearly showed they'd read it, that they'd understood it, and they've done some further research. That person got a little bit more time from me. Somebody like yourself who's gone, okay, how do I get in front of these thought leaders? Well, I'll interview them. It's sort of about coming at it from a slightly different angle. You will not be able to succeed if you think laterally. And that's another problem with lawyers, is that we're trained to think laterally. We've got this approach that we're just going to throw a head at it and eventually it'll crack open. And I think that the approach you have to take is, well, no, if my ultimate goal is to do X, what are the steps I can take to sort of approach that from that angle? And it's very rarely straight on. Very rarely it's straight on.
So you're talking about like reverse engineering it, find your goal and then kind of work backwards instead.
Absolutely. Look, there will be people in no doubt who listen to this or in the cohort who are not struggling. Okay, because there's going to be someone who got the uni medal, and there's going to be someone who not only got the uni medal, they were incredibly good at a particular area of law, and they're going to go and be a judge's associate. And then after they do the judge's associate thing, they're going to go into a big tier firm. And after that, they may go to the bar, they'll take silk, they'll be on the bench. There's people who follow that career path every single day of the week. That's not for everyone. And if that's not the path you want to go down, or if that's the path that, if there's a different path that you want to take, you have to think, okay, what can I offer to the law that other people can't? So for example, if you speak a different language, that's a huge value add, because you can go to a partner and say, listen, I know there's this community that's not being served because no one speaks their language. I speak their language really well. These are the problems that the community's disclosed to me. Do you want to have a chat, or maybe we can do a clinic about that sort of stuff? If you're somebody who has a skill set in marketing, or you're interested in that sort of stuff, you can go to an old lawyer who's, past their heyday and say, listen, hey, I know about all this cool stuff you did. I don't know anything about law, but you don't know anything about marketing. Let's work together and I will teach you about this if you teach me about that. Think about the value you're bringing to the person that you're asking a favor from. Don't just go there with your hands out, because generally speaking, even generous people who want to help you, they go, how can I help this person? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely a good way to view it too, coming at it at a different angle. Because no doubt you guys probably get inundated with thousands upon thousands of emails for any one application. So, it's definitely interesting to hear how, on the other shoe from a director in particular, of how it's actually coming across.
Absolutely. And look, we know no malice. We know you're trying your best. We know that you're thinking and creative, and the person that approaches is even better than the one that doesn't, because there's people out there who just don't do anything about it, and they're out of it. But even if you're very good, even if you're doing the right things, really have a good thing. I mean, as I said, 4 to 5 times a day, I probably get approached 200 times a month. 2 people actually came to me and said, Jahan, here's the value that I think I can give you. You wrote this thing and I agree with these parts, but there's a part I don't agree with, and here's why. And I go, wow, that person cares. That person thought about it. That person's trying to add value to my life. What a, that's someone who gets it. So I guess it's sort of having that mentality of not just take. How can I give? How can I help?
Yeah, absolutely. That's, again, such great advice. Just as we come towards, I guess, the end of the podcast, I've just got a few quick-fire rapid questions for you.
Let's do it.
If you weren't a lawyer, what do you reckon you'd be doing?
I think that I would probably be in real estate. I believe that I thoroughly enjoy talking to people. I thoroughly enjoy trying to get a good deal for my clients. So I think that real estate or sales in general would be something that I would be definitely doing.
Yeah, cool. And what is your definition of success?
I think my definition of success is, and it's taken me a while to get to this stage, it's getting my client the best outcome possible for someone with my level of expertise. And what I mean by that broadly is I will never be able to get the kind of result Greg James QC will ever, it's just not realistic. Somebody who's been at the bar that long and some lawyer who's out 8 years. But can I get them a result as good as someone who's been out 8 years can get them the best possible result? That's success to me. And that's the benchmark I hold myself against. Somebody who's had the experiences I've had and the opportunities I've had. What kind of outcomes am I getting for my clients? All things considered.
Yeah, I like that whole approach where, a lot of people obviously try to compare themselves with other lawyers saying, I'm not this good, but I like your approach of saying, what's the best result I can get for them? It
happens all the time. I have associates coming and they go, oh, man, oh God, we the client got this outcome. They got 150 hours of community service. If you had done this, it probably would have been 20. And I go, yeah, probably. But you know what? If we had silk there, the probably would have gotten an ice cream cone from the bench. Like, don't compare yourself to me. It's about, 150 hours is actually pretty good compared to what they actually did. And given the fact that, you're fairly new to the law, good on you. If I was your age and I was doing it for the 3rd time, I would never have gotten 150 hours. I would have gone like 250. You're amazing. And you lose sight of that because in law, you're comparing yourself to these people who are just amazing at what they do. Turning around. I'll never forget when I was an associate, I saw a partner turn around this contract, like a 135-page contract. They turned it around in like 5 hours. Now, that would have been a month worth of work for me. But in 5 hours, they found everything they needed to. They cut it apart. They did this amazing job. And I was just like, well, I'll never be able to do that. That's just not realistic. And it's not, because I hadn't done it for 20 years. At 20 years, I probably could do it in 4 to 5 hours. And it's kind of having that realization that, you know what, I'm not bad. It's just I've got more experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, what is a summary of your main bits of advice that you'd pass on to someone who's starting out their legal journey, or, a young lawyer?
What is far less important than how you conduct yourself. If you are going to invest, you should invest in developing skills and not knowledge. So if you're a young lawyer, or if I was speaking to a young Jahan, focus on the following areas: becoming as articulate as possible, becoming as resilient as possible, and double down on who you are as a person. I'm generally quite an empathetic person. Double down on that. If you're an empathetic person, don't try to be a jerk. Similarly, if you're a jerk and you're recalcitrant and you are stubborn, the law has a place for you. Don't try to be like kind, touchy-feely. It doesn't work. So double down on who you are, but focus less on what you know and focus more on how you are and how you conduct yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, once again, great advice. If anyone wants to get in contact with you, what's the best way to do that, or if they want to catch up for a chat?
Yeah, look, I'm on LinkedIn. So Jahan Kalantar on LinkedIn. I'm also, you can send it through to info@executivelegal.com.au. That gets sent through to me eventually. I'm always happy to chat with young lawyers, always happy to, share war stories and experiences. And I am not naive as to the difficulties young lawyers have. I was a young lawyer once. It is very, very hard, but it does get easier. Every step, it gets a little bit easier.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for your time. It's been great chatting to you.
My absolute pleasure, mate. I love your podcast. I've been a long-time listener, and I'm really proud to be on it.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Young Lawyer Podcast. I just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this podcast. The purpose of it is to close the gap between students and those already in the legal profession, as it is fairly daunting trying to make that transition. So if you've found this useful, make sure you share it with your friends, family, or colleagues, so that way we can grow the young lawyer community. If you want to stay up to date, make sure you follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And make sure you join us on the next episode.